The call in another language. The Grand Meridian Hotel towered above the city like a monument carved from glass and ambition, its metallic panels shimmering beneath the late morning sun as guests from every corner of the world flowed in and out of its revolving doors. Inside, beneath chandeliers shaped like crystal constellations, a quiet world of polished marble and hushed elegance unfolded. And somewhere within this carefully orchestrated luxury, a young woman named Alina Brooks pushed her cleaning cart across the lobby floor with the kind of measured grace one learned only after years of working in a place where every gesture was scrutinized. At 27, Alina was the kind of person who blended into any room, not because she was forgettable, but because she had learned long ago that being unseen was the safest way to survive in an environment where people like her were expected to stay in the shadows. Her ebony complexion, neat ponytail, and perfectly pressed uniform made her indistinguishable from half the cleaning staff, at least to the eyes of guests and supervisors who rarely paused long enough to look at the person behind the uniform. Yet beneath her quiet exterior lived a mind that absorbed the world with astonishing clarity. Few people knew that Alina held a degree in comparative linguistics from the University of Cape Town, spoke 8 languages, and had once dreamed of becoming a cultural liaison for international institutions. Life, however, had not cooperated. Her father's illness had forced her to accept a job that offered stability and immediate income, and as the years passed, the dreams she once carried had faded into fragile memories she rarely dared to revisit. On this particular morning, while the lobby buzzed with early arrivals checking in for a global architecture symposium, Alina was kneeling beside a marble pillar, wiping down its base. Her phone vibrated sharply in the pocket of her uniform, startling her enough that she nearly dropped the cloth. She froze. Personal calls during shifts were strictly forbidden. Manager Morgan had repeated that rule so often that it lived in her subconscious like a warning siren. But when she glanced at the caller ID, her heart hammered once before leaping into her throat. Delft International Institute of Cultural Studies. She had applied for their postgraduate fellowship 6 times over the last 2 years, each time receiving polite rejections or no response at all. The fellowship was highly competitive, but it was also one of the few programs in the world that focused on applied linguistics and cultural diplomacy, her true passion. She pressed the phone against her leg, hesitating. If she didn't answer, she might lose the only opportunity she'd had in years. If she did answer, she risked suspension, maybe even termination. Her decision was made in a heartbeat as she ducked behind the pillar, shielding herself from the clear line of sight of the reception desk. With a breath that trembled faintly, she answered in a low voice. "Hallo, dit is Alina Brooks." The voice on the other end responded in Dutch, and instantly her shoulders relaxed in familiarity as she slipped seamlessly into fluent conversation. It was Professor Willem de Graaf, a renowned researcher whose work she had admired since her undergraduate days, and he had personally reviewed her application. They spoke about her proposal regarding linguistic adaptation in multicultural negotiations, the reasons her previous submissions had been delayed by administrative errors, and the possibility of granting her a supplemental interview. As she clarified her motivations and academic intentions in meticulous but perfectly natural Dutch, she didn't notice the shift in the atmosphere until the professor paused mid-sentence. A shadow stretched across the floor near her hand. Slowly, almost dreadfully, she lifted her gaze. Standing mere feet away was Lionel Heron, the billionaire real estate magnate who owned the entire Meridian Hotel Group, a man known for his icy expressions, immaculate suits, and talent for turning bankrupt properties into empires. Beside him stood Manager Morgan, her posture rigid, her eyes flaring with disapproval, so intense it felt like a physical blow. Heron's gaze, however, showed something entirely different. Confusion, curiosity, and a trace of astonishment as he listened to her flowing Dutch, spoken with the ease of a native. Alina's pulse thundered in her ears. She murmured hurriedly into the phone, "Ik bel later terug. Dank you well," then ended the call with shaking fingers. "Miss Brooks, my office. Now." Morgan's voice cut sharply through the thick silence. The walk across the lobby felt endless, and not a single staff member dared to meet her eyes. She could sense the mixture of pity, judgment, and anticipation in the air. Everyone knew that being summoned by Manager Morgan after breaking a rule rarely ended well. In the employees' corridor, the sounds of the luxurious hotel faded into dimmer lights and cheaper flooring. The staff-only doors always made Alina feel like she was stepping from one world into another, a world where uniforms mattered more than identities. Inside Morgan's office, she stood stiffly, while the manager paced behind the desk like a hawk preparing to strike. "Do you think the rules do not apply to you?" she snapped. "We've gone over this dozens of times. No personal calls during shifts, especially not in public spaces. And whatever you were speaking French? German?" Alina swallowed hard. "Dutch," she corrected gently, regretting it immediately when Morgan's expression darkened. "I don't care," Morgan snapped. "What matters is that Mr. Harren witnessed a cleaning attendant lounging behind a pillar while babbling in a foreign language like she's on vacation. Do you have any idea how unprofessional that looked?" The injustice stung like a slap. She wanted to say that receptionists took calls all the time. She wanted to say that her work had exceeded every performance review. She wanted to say she was discussing a potential fellowship that could change her life. But she knew none of that mattered. People like her weren't allowed to have reasons. Explanations only sounded like excuses. "Effective immediately," Morgan said with cold finality. "You are reassigned to the lower ground service washrooms for the next 3 months. No overtime pay. No exceptions." Alina felt something crumble inside her. The lower ground washrooms were notorious heavy foot traffic, event night messes, long hours, and no ventilation. It was the punishment position every cleaner feared. But Morgan wasn't done. "If you repeat anything like this again, we will have no choice but to terminate your employment." That night, Alina lay in her tiny rented room with peeling paint and flickering lights, staring blankly at the certificate from her university pinned above her bed. It felt like a photograph of a life that belonged to someone else, someone who had believed the world would treat potential and effort equally. She wiped away silent tears and tried to steady her breath. She had work in the morning. She couldn't afford to fall apart. But the next morning, before she could even reach her cleaning station, a message crackled through the staff intercom. "Alina Brooks, to Human Resources." Immediately, a chill ran through her. HR was on the top floor, an area where regular staff never went. Executives occupied that space. Important guests. Decision makers. As she rode the elevator up, surrounded by sharply dressed managers who didn't spare her a glance, she felt more out of place than ever. When she finally stepped into the HR office, the director, a polished woman with rimless glasses, looked up at her. "Miss Brooks, Mr. Harren has requested to meet with you. Right now." Alina's heart nearly stopped as she followed the director toward the double oak doors leading into the owner's private office. She felt as though she were walking straight into her own firing. Inside, the office was enormous, its floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a breathtaking view of the city. Lionel Harren stood near the window, flipping through a file. When he turned, his eyes lingered on her with an intensity that made her spine stiffen. "Miss Brooks," he began, "I came across something yesterday that surprised me." He tapped the file. "Your resume." Alina blinked, shocked. How had he even accessed it? 8 languages, he continued. Graduated with distinction. Specialized in cross-cultural communication. And yet, you've been cleaning guest rooms and washing floors for 4 years. He closed the file with a soft but deliberate snap. Why? Her throat tightened. She had answered that question so many times in job interviews to people who smiled politely, thanked her for her time, then told her she was a poor fit for reasons they never explained. But explaining it to him felt different, heavier, as if the truth might finally matter. "I applied for internal positions," she said quietly. "Many times, I never received a response." Harren's jaw flexed. "Manager Morgan rejected all your applications?" "Yes," she whispered. He gave no outward reaction, but something in his expression changed like a puzzle piece clicking into place. After a moment, he straightened his posture. "Tomorrow, we host delegates from the Nordic East Asian Cultural Consortium," he said. "They require someone fluent in Dutch, Mandarin, and Japanese. None of our staff meets that requirement." He paused. "Except you." Alina stared at him, unable to speak. "I want you to serve as our temporary multilingual liaison officer for the duration of the event," he continued. "Effective immediately." Her breath caught. "That position pays $6,000 a week," he added calmly. She felt the floor tilt beneath her. It was more than she earned in 4 months. "Why me?" she finally managed. His gaze settled on her with unwavering seriousness. "Because someone with your qualifications should never be scrubbing floors." The next morning unfolded with a quiet intensity that wrapped itself around Zoe before she had even finished tying her apron. The hotel corridors seemed different today, brighter in some places, dimmer in others, as though the walls themselves were holding secrets she had not yet been invited to hear. The memory of Lucas's unexpected interest lingered like a warm but confusing presence, and Zoe found herself replaying every moment with restless curiosity. She kept asking herself why someone like him, a man whose world was carved out of power, precision, and profit, would take a moment to ask about a language she barely used outside of private thoughts. The way he had looked at her, not with superiority but with a kind of measured curiosity, had stirred feelings she had locked away long ago, feelings she had learned to suppress during years of blending into the background for survival. As she pushed her cleaning cart toward the executive floor, Zoe could feel the familiar tug of caution mixed with an undeniable spark of anticipation. She had convinced herself that yesterday's interaction had been nothing more than a coincidence or a passing intrigue on Lucas's part, something he would forget as quickly as he had noticed. But part of her, an instinct sharpened by hardship, knew better. Powerful people rarely asked questions without reason, and even more rarely did they forget the answers. Zoe paused for a moment at the tall glass windows overlooking the city below, letting the morning sunlight stretch across her face. Somewhere out there were people who woke up confident, with choices waiting at their doorstep. She wondered, just briefly, what it would feel like to be one of them. But she pushed the thought away before it grew roots. Fantasies were luxuries she couldn't afford. Zoe reached room 1103 with her cart, her mind steadying into the practiced rhythm of her duties. But, as she slipped her keycard into the lock and pushed the door open, her breath hitched unexpectedly. The room was empty, at least at first glance, but the lingering scent of expensive cologne told her someone had recently left. The room was immaculate, surprisingly untouched, except for a navy blue notebook resting on the glass table. It lay open slightly, as though someone had left it in a hurry. She would never, under normal circumstances, let her gaze wander to a guest's belongings, but this notebook was different. Her eyes skimmed the exposed page for a brief second, unintentionally catching the handwritten words: "Acquisitions, Brussels contract, pending negotiation." She froze. Brussels, Dutch-speaking region. Was this a coincidence, or something bigger? Before Zoe could move, the door clicked behind her. She turned swiftly, her pulse breaking into a race. Lucas Sterling stood at the doorway, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that looked like it had been tailored directly onto him. His eyes widened, but not with anger, more like surprise, mixed with something she couldn't identify. "Good morning, Zoe," he said, his voice controlled yet softened in a way that wasn't typical for a man of his status. Zoe instinctively stepped back, apologizing immediately for being in the room, but he raised a hand gently, stopping her words in their tracks. "You're doing your job. No need to apologize." His calmness only made her more nervous. There were powerful people who showed kindness with calculation, and she couldn't be sure into which category Lucas belonged. Lucas stepped into the room fully, his presence commanding without being aggressive. For a long, measured moment, he said nothing, simply observing her with an almost unsettling steadiness. Then his gaze shifted, just slightly, toward the open notebook. Zoe tensed, ready to apologize again. But Lucas only exhaled and closed the notebook with a patient, unhurried motion. "Interesting line of work, isn't it?" he asked, tapping the cover lightly. "Different languages, different cultures, different negotiations. Sometimes a single phrase can change the direction of a deal." His words were casual, but his eyes told another story. He was testing her. Sensing her thoughts, he added, "You speak Dutch, right?" There it was. The moment she had hoped he'd forget and feared he would remember. Zoe nodded, trying to remain composed. She answered softly, "Yes, I speak Dutch." She didn't mention why she had learned it, nor the memories tied to it. Those belonged to a version of herself she kept buried. Lucas's expression shifted subtly. Something close to intrigue deepened in his eyes. He leaned slightly against the polished table, crossing his arms with a posture that was somehow both casual and authoritative. "And how fluent would you say you are? Conversational? Professional?" The question was delivered in that same deceptively gentle tone, but Zoe sensed the weight behind it. This wasn't idle curiosity. He was evaluating her, not as a maid, but as something else entirely. Zoe hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Professional," she answered, though her voice was steady enough that it barely revealed the inner turmoil she felt. Lucas nodded slowly, as though this confirmed something he had already been considering. The silence that followed was thick, filled with a kind of anticipation Zoe couldn't decipher. Finally, Lucas pushed himself off the table and took a step toward her, a single step, yet it felt like the floor shifted beneath her. His tone lowered, not in threat, but in intention. "There might be something," he began, pausing as if selecting each word with surgical precision. "Something I could use your help with." The air between them tightened. Zoe's mind raced, not with excitement, but with a wary alertness born from years of learning that opportunity often walked hand in hand with danger. She looked into Lucas's eyes and saw something she hadn't expected. Sincerity. Not manipulation, not condescension, just the quiet confidence of a man who wasn't in the habit of asking favors unless he meant them. "But," Lucas continued, raising an eyebrow slightly, "only if you're comfortable. And only if you're interested." The way he said it made the offer feel strangely safe, yet undeniably transformative. Before she could respond, a sharp voice pierced the tension like a blade. "Miss Lane." It was Mrs. Davenport, the supervisor, rigid posture, clipped tone, and an uncanny ability to appear at the worst possible moment. She stood at the doorway, her expression a perfect mixture of suspicion and disapproval. "Why are you not attending to your assigned rooms?" she demanded, eyes shooting between Zoe and Lucas as though she were witnessing something forbidden. Lucas straightened smoothly, his demeanor shifting into a professional seriousness that only someone accustomed to leadership could command. "I asked her to step in for a moment," he said calmly, offering Zoe silent reassurance with a brief glance. "Your staff works exceptionally hard. I hope you don't mind if I request a brief conversation." Mrs. Davenport's face stiffened in a way that suggested she very much did mind, but Lucas Sterling was not a man one argued with lightly. "Of course, Mr. Sterling," she said through a forced smile. "Please proceed." She stepped away reluctantly, but Zoe knew this wouldn't be the end of it. Her supervisor would undoubtedly hold this moment against her. But before anxiety could settle too deeply, Lucas spoke again, his voice returning to its warm steadiness. "Meet me in the Sky Lounge. At 6, he said softly, lowering his tone so only she could hear. "No pressure, just a conversation. I think you'll find it worthwhile." Zoe nodded slowly, her breath catching in a way she didn't fully understand. When Lucas walked past her and exited the room, the quiet that followed felt charged alive with possibility and uncertainty. She stood motionless for several seconds, trying to gather her thoughts. Whatever Lucas was planning, whatever he saw in her, it was clear that her life was about to step out of the narrow hallway it had been confined to for years. But whether she was walking into an opportunity or a storm? She wasn't sure. All she knew was that this meeting, this single moment of choice, would change everything. The Skyline Lounge on the 35th floor of the Meridian Hotel was a world entirely apart from the polished lobbies and service corridors Zoe had inhabited for years. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a breathtaking panorama of the city, skyscrapers gleaming like shards of silver under the afternoon sun. The hum of the elevator doors closing beneath her felt distant, as though she had been transported into another reality where power, wealth, and ambition existed in tangible, almost palpable forms. Zoe had been in this hotel countless times, yet she had never been allowed in this space. This was where decisions were made, deals were negotiated, and futures were determined. The faint aroma of fresh pastries mingled with the subtle tang of expensive coffee, and the soft notes of a jazz piano seemed to emphasize the elegance of the place. Every instinct in her told her to pause, to breathe, to reconsider. But the image of Lucas Sterling's calm, confident gaze pushed her forward. When she entered the lounge, Lucas was already seated at a corner table, an unobtrusive stack of folders neatly arranged beside him. He gestured toward the empty chair across from him, his smile small but genuine. Zoe hesitated, letting her hands rest briefly on the chair back before sitting down. The moment her weight settled, she became acutely aware of the contrast between her uniform and the tailored suits surrounding her. In this space, her identity as a maid seemed almost impossible to reconcile with the woman sitting before Lucas, a woman with an advanced education, mastery of languages, and the subtle awareness of cultural nuances that most executives lacked entirely. And yet, here she was. Lucas didn't seem to see her as the hotel had always instructed its staff to see themselves. Invisible, replaceable, expendable. He seemed to see her clearly, fully, and it both exhilarated and unsettled her. "Zoe," he began, leaning slightly forward, "I didn't call you here just because I was impressed by your language skills yesterday. That was only the surface." His hands folded neatly in front of him, fingers tapping lightly against one another. "I've been watching this property for a long time, more than you can imagine. And I've noticed a pattern, an inefficiency, a blind spot. The hotel has been hemorrhaging talent quietly, systematically, for years. Staff who could contribute far beyond their current roles are being overlooked, dismissed, or undervalued simply because they don't fit a certain image, a certain expectation. And you're a perfect example." Zoe's heart skipped a beat. She had suspected for years that her own frustration wasn't unique, that others like her had been sidelined for similar reasons. But hearing it articulated so clearly, by someone of Lucas's stature, was disorienting. "I want to give you an opportunity, Zoe. One that goes far beyond your current duties, far beyond this hotel." She blinked, searching his face for any trace of jest. But there was none. Only determination, clarity, and a quiet intensity that made her pulse quicken. Lucas slid one of the folders toward her, the weight of it heavier than the physical paper. Zoe opened it carefully, revealing pages filled with spreadsheets, notes, and evaluations. Names, positions, qualifications, hundreds of them, many of which highlighted employees who had skills far above the roles they were assigned. Some spoke multiple languages fluently. Others had degrees in finance, management, or international law. Yet they had been hidden behind housekeeping uniforms, front desk counters, or administrative cubicles. Zoe's eyes widened as she skimmed the pages. "You mean," she started, hesitating, "this is all real? This isn't just a theory?" Lucas shook his head. "It's real, and it's been costing the company, literally, millions every year. Not just money, reputation, efficiency, loyalty. Talent is being wasted, Zoe, and I want you to help me fix it." She swallowed hard. Her mind raced, recalling the countless times she had been dismissed, ignored, or humiliated because her potential had been invisible to those in power. Memories of long nights scrubbing floors while colleagues with lesser qualifications received promotions, raises, and opportunities flashed before her eyes. The injustice had carved itself deep into her consciousness, shaping her patience, her resilience, and her ability to observe without reacting, skills that had allowed her to survive, but also concealed her capabilities. Now, the man across from her, whose name carried weight across industries, was not only acknowledging her abilities, but inviting her to take the lead in a transformative project. The gravity of the moment pressed against her chest with a mixture of exhilaration and disbelief. "What exactly would you want me to do?" she asked finally, trying to steady her voice. Lucas leaned back, the city skyline behind him, casting a long shadow across the table. "I want you to design and implement a pilot program. Identify hidden talent within this hotel, evaluate their skills, and create a pathway for them to contribute meaningfully. The goal isn't just efficiency, it's equity. I want to create a system where nobody's potential is wasted because of bias, assumptions, or ignorance. And I want someone I can trust to lead it. Someone who understands the experience of being unseen." His eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. Zoe felt her pulse quicken, realizing the enormity of what he was offering. This was not just a job. It was a platform, a stage to enact the change she had dreamed of for years but had never dared to imagine as attainable. Zoe nodded slowly, the words forming in her mind before she spoke them. I can do this," she said. And though her voice was calm, the weight behind it carried years of suppressed determination. Lucas's lips curved into a small, approving smile. "Good. I want you to start immediately. You'll have full access to employee files, training records, and departmental reports. And I trust you'll need some discretion, considering the sensitivities involved." He gestured toward a small security badge lying on the table. "This will grant you full administrative access for the duration of the pilot. No one needs to know why you have it, except you and me." Zoe picked up the badge with trembling fingers, the cool metal feeling heavier than any cleaning cart she had ever pushed. In that instant, the scope of her world shifted. For years, her life had been confined to the narrow boundaries of the hotel's back corridors, where her knowledge, education, and multilingual abilities had been invisible to all but a few. Now, a door had opened, a literal and metaphorical entry into spaces she had only observed from the outside. And more importantly, she had the authority to enact change, to shine a light on talents that had been buried in the shadows for far too long. The next week was a whirlwind. Zoe immersed herself in employee files, analyzing linguistic competencies, certifications, and past performance reviews. She discovered dozens of staff members whose qualifications had been ignored, receptionists fluent in 3 or 4 languages, housekeeping staff with degrees in international business, and administrative assistants with experience in cross-cultural negotiation. Each profile she uncovered deepened her determination and sharpened her focus. Yet, alongside the excitement came the sobering reality that challenging entrenched norms was never simple. Department heads who had grown accustomed to unquestioned authority now viewed her with suspicion. Whispers followed her down corridors, and subtle resistance emerged at every turn. But Zoe had anticipated this. Her years of navigating invisible spaces had taught her patience, strategy, and the art of quiet resilience. Every obstacle became a calculated step toward the larger goal. On the 10th day, she received her first major challenge, a series of translated documents intended for a Nordic, East Asian trade delegation. The materials had been outsourced at significant expense to a translation firm that lacked formal verification. Scanning through the documents, Zoe immediately noticed errors that were subtle but potentially disastrous. Terms that could offend, phrases that misrepresented agreements, and cultural nuances ignored entirely. She corrected them meticulously, referencing multiple linguistic and cultural sources, and created a report highlighting the risks of the previous translations. She knew that if she had not intervened, the delegation could have walked away, contracts jeopardized, and reputations damaged. When she submitted her corrected versions, Lucas called her into his office, reviewing her notes with focused intensity. "This is exceptional work," he said quietly. You've not only saved the company from financial and diplomatic loss, but demonstrated exactly why we cannot continue ignoring talent within our own walls." Zoe felt a mixture of pride and vindication. Every correction, every insight was not just a reflection of her own capabilities, but a testament to the countless employees whose potential had been dismissed. Yet, she also understood that this was only the beginning. Changing systems, exposing biases, and realigning entrenched structures would require more than one successful intervention. It would require strategy, courage, and the unwavering belief that talent, when recognized and empowered, could reshape the landscape of the entire organization. That evening, as Zoe returned to the modest apartment she still called home, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The city lights glittered against the dark river like scattered diamonds, mirroring the possibilities now stretching out before her. She realized that the world she had long believed indifferent was suddenly alert, waiting for her next move. And she, who had once been invisible, now stood at the threshold of transformation, not just for herself, but for all those whose abilities had been quietly buried in the shadows. The following weeks were a revelation for Zoe, both exhilarating and exhausting in ways she had never experienced before. As she navigated the executive corridors with her new badge, she began to see patterns she had long suspected but could never prove. Talent was everywhere, quietly brilliant, hidden in plain sight, waiting for recognition, but the system had built walls around it, reinforced by prejudice, complacency, and fear of change. Zoe started creating a map of these hidden talents, a network of potential she could tap into. Receptionists who had once been dismissed for their accents, security staff fluent in multiple languages, back-office administrators with degrees in international law, all of them were overlooked because the system valued appearances and conformity over actual skill. Each discovery left her both frustrated and determined. The more she documented, the more she understood that what she was witnessing was not mere oversight, but deliberate neglect, a silent gatekeeping that had persisted for decades. The weight of that realization pressed heavily on her, yet it also fueled an unstoppable fire inside her. Zoe's work required stealth, diplomacy, and constant vigilance. She quickly learned that every conversation, every file review, could have consequences if the wrong eyes saw them. Managers like Mrs. Davenport and Thomas Whitmore, though officially distanced after their public missteps, still wielded influence among mid-level staff, whispering doubts and subtly undermining Zoe's authority. But Zoe was no longer the same woman who had silently endured 6 years of invisible labor. She approached each situation strategically, observing, listening, and building alliances quietly. She identified those employees who shared her vision for change and nurtured their potential, offering mentorship and guidance without ever overstepping her bounds. In time, a network of hidden allies began to emerge, a coalition of the overlooked whose skills could reshape the hotel from the inside out. Their loyalty was not bought. It was earned through recognition, validation, and the opportunity to finally contribute meaningfully to an organization that had long ignored them. One evening, while reviewing talent records late in the Grand Plaza's executive library, Zoe noticed something alarming. A series of internal memos revealed that key departments were repeatedly bypassing qualified minority employees for promotions, even when vacancies clearly aligned with their skill sets. Worse, these decisions were being systematically documented to appear neutral, while quietly reinforcing biases. Her pulse quickened as she realized the depth of the problem. This was not about incompetence or oversight. It was an institutionalized pattern designed to maintain control, ensuring that certain voices would never rise above the background. Zoe felt the familiar sting of injustice, but this time it was paired with a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer cleaning rooms or pretending her capabilities didn't exist. She had the authority, the tools, and the platform to confront the system head-on. As the hotel prepared for its largest international summit yet, Zoe's role became increasingly pivotal. Delegates from Europe, Asia, and the Americas would converge on the property, and every interaction, document, and negotiation depended on flawless communication and cultural understanding. Zoe meticulously reviewed contracts, speeches, and conference materials, correcting linguistic errors and cultural missteps that could have caused serious diplomatic friction. One night, working until the early hours, she discovered a misalignment in translation that could have led to a costly misunderstanding between a Dutch delegation and their Chinese partners. She redrafted the materials, providing annotations and explanations for each correction. By dawn, she had compiled a comprehensive report and presented it to Lucas, who read through the notes with intense focus. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable for a moment, and then he nodded with approval. "You've not just prevented a potential disaster," he said quietly. "You've reminded everyone that precision, cultural awareness, and talent are priceless commodities. The value of your work cannot be overstated." Despite these successes, Zoe faced persistent resistance from staff who were uncomfortable with her sudden authority and the disruption she represented to the old hierarchy. Rumors began to circulate that she was overstepping, manipulating management, or seeking personal gain. Zoe ignored the whispers, focusing instead on her mission: identifying hidden talent, documenting inequities, and empowering employees who had long been dismissed. Slowly, her efforts began to show results. A bilingual concierge was promoted to lead international client relations. A security officer with a degree in engineering was assigned to oversee technical operations for VIP events, and several back-office administrators were given leadership roles in cross-cultural communications. Each advancement sent ripples through the organization, challenging assumptions and forcing colleagues to confront their own biases. The hotel, once a place where talent was buried under uniforms, was beginning to hum with newfound energy and capability. It was during one of these late nights that Zoe stumbled upon a series of emails that revealed the extent of past corruption. The messages documented inflated payments to external consultants who were unqualified for the tasks they had been hired to perform, often linked to relatives of managers who had enforced discriminatory practices. Zoe felt a mix of anger and vindication. For years, these misallocations had cost the hotel millions, while employees with real qualifications were denied opportunities. She knew she had to proceed carefully. Exposing the corruption could make her a target, yet failing to do so would betray the very principles that had guided her journey. After careful consideration, she created a secure folder with all the evidence, cross-referenced with employee records, contracts, and verified certifications. It was meticulous work, a digital dossier that could not be ignored. Finally, Zoe requested a meeting with Lucas to review her findings. As she entered his office, she noticed the familiar calm yet imposing presence that had characterized their first conversation. Lucas gestured for her to sit, and she laid out the full extent of her discoveries. He listened without interruption, absorbing the depth of the inequities, the hidden talents, and the misallocated resources. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers, his expression thoughtful. "Zoe," he said slowly, "you've done more than I could have imagined. Not only have you corrected operational inefficiencies and prevented diplomatic errors, but you've also uncovered a systemic problem that has persisted for years. What you've compiled is powerful, undeniable, and transformative. You've given me the opportunity to act decisively." Zoe felt a surge of cautious optimism. The work was far from over, but for the first time, she felt the possibility of real change. Her role had evolved from observer to architect, from invisible staff member to someone whose vision could shape the future of an entire organization. And while she had known this journey would be challenging, the realization that she was no longer alone, that there was a network of talented employees ready to rise alongside her, made the path ahead feel not only manageable but exhilarating. The quiet moments of reflection in her small apartment, once filled with uncertainty and frustration, were now replaced with a sense of purpose and strategy. Each late night, every corrected document, every talent identified, was a brick in the foundation of a hotel and a system being rebuilt from the ground up. One that finally recognized merit, integrity, and potential over prejudice, complacency, and appearances. The morning light filtered through the glass walls of the Grand Plaza's executive wing, but it could not warm the tension that hummed silently throughout the top floors. Zoe arrived early, her mind racing with every piece of evidence she had meticulously gathered over the past month. The files, spreadsheets, emails, and internal memos had all been cataloged with precision, creating an irrefutable record of neglect, bias, and systematic mismanagement. Yet, the magnitude of what she was about to reveal weighed heavily on her. She had prepared for this moment, mentally and emotionally, but no amount of rehearsal could entirely remove the nervous flutter of anticipation. As she walked past the familiar hallways, now navigated with an authority she had never known in her years as a cleaning staff member, she reflected on how far she had come. 6 years ago, these same corridors had been a place of silent endurance and frustration, where her talents were overlooked and her contributions invisible. Now, each polished floor and gleaming staircase symbolized not just luxury, but potential, an opportunity to right systemic wrongs that had festered for decades. Lucas Sterling was already waiting in the boardroom when Zoe arrived. The room, expansive and intimidating, was lined with dark oak panels and filled with the smell of freshly brewed coffee, yet it felt less like a workspace and more like the stage for a reckoning. Executives and department heads had been summoned under the guise of a routine strategic meeting. But Zoe knew the truth. Today, the hidden infrastructure of injustice within the hotel would finally be exposed. Lucas gestured for her to begin, his gaze steady and supportive. As Zoe placed her laptop on the polished table and projected her findings onto the massive screen, the room fell into an attentive silence. Graphs displayed disparities in promotion rates. Tables highlighted employees with advanced qualifications relegated to menial roles, and emails revealed repeated favoritism toward unqualified staff linked to managerial nepotism. The evidence was overwhelming, and Zoe could see the shifting expressions around the room: shock, disbelief, and, in some cases, barely concealed guilt. As she walked the room through the documentation, Zoe noticed Thomas Whitmore's face pale, his usual smug composure crumbling with each slide. He attempted to interject several times, offering weak excuses about hiring decisions and contract awards, but Zoe had anticipated his deflections. Calmly, she countered each argument with documented proof: dates of ignored applications, confirmation emails, performance reviews that were overlooked, and records of excessive payments to unqualified consultants connected to his family. Every rebuttal was delivered with precision, her voice steady and clear, her words carrying the weight of truth that could not be refuted. She could feel the energy in the room shifting, the air thick with the realization that the systems they had relied upon to maintain control had finally been exposed. This was not simply a correction of errors. This was a revelation, a confrontation with decades of unacknowledged prejudice and corruption. Lucas spoke next, his tone measured yet firm. What Zoe has uncovered is not an isolated incident. It is a pattern, a culture that has, until now, gone unchallenged. This culture has cost the company financially, operationally, and morally. But more importantly, it has cost individuals, the brilliant, qualified, and overlooked individuals whose potential has been stifled. He paused, letting his words resonate, and then continued, "We are not here to assign blame in private. We are here to take responsibility, to correct past wrongs, and to implement systems that ensure this never happens again." The room remained silent, the executives' faces betraying the gravity of the situation. The humiliation and guilt were palpable. Yet for Zoe, there was also a sense of vindication, a quiet, powerful confirmation that her years of perseverance had not been in vain. With Lucas's support, Zoe outlined a comprehensive action plan. The program she proposed was multifaceted: immediate promotions and reassignments for overlooked employees, creation of a mentorship network to guide hidden talents, mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all management, and an internal audit system to prevent favoritism and mismanagement in the future. Each recommendation was carefully supported by data, case studies, and projected outcomes. The room absorbed her presentation in a mix of awe and discomfort. The scale of change she proposed was unprecedented in the hotel's history, and many realized that resistance was futile against such incontrovertible evidence. Zoe could sense that this moment would be remembered not just as a turning point for the company, but as a defining moment in her own life, a transformation from invisibility to authority, from suppressed potential to undeniable influence. Whitmore attempted one last feeble defense, arguing that the decisions were based on experience rather than formal qualifications. But Zoe countered calmly and firmly. She detailed the measurable impact of hiring qualified, skilled employees over relying on nepotism, including reduced errors, higher client satisfaction, and increased revenue. Her words were not accusations. They were empirical observations, supported by a meticulous trail of documentation. Even the most resistant managers could not deny the data. Lucas, recognizing the moment for decisive action, concluded the session with authority. Effective immediately, Thomas Whitmore is terminated for cause. Sarah Richards is reassigned while her involvement is reviewed. And all departments will undergo an audit to identify and promote hidden talent. The room, once tense with resistance, seemed to exhale collectively, the weight of accountability settling into a new equilibrium. After the meeting, Zoe returned to her office, feeling the complex swirl of emotions: pride, relief, exhaustion, and an undercurrent of cautious anticipation. Her phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from employees who had long been overlooked, messages filled with gratitude, admiration, and renewed hope. For the first time, she understood the true impact of her work. It was not merely correcting errors or exposing corruption, but reshaping the very culture of an organization, unlocking human potential, and setting a precedent for equity and opportunity. Sitting at her desk, overlooking the city skyline, Zoe allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The journey ahead was still long, the challenges of systemic change never ending. But she knew with clarity that she was no longer invisible. Her voice, her expertise, and her integrity had earned a place at the table, and she would not rest until the doors she had opened remained accessible for every overlooked talent who deserved to be seen. In the weeks following the explosive boardroom confrontation, Zoe's world transformed in ways she had once never dared to imagine. What had started as a long overdue reformation within the Grand Plaza Hotel was now blossoming into a complete restructuring of its internal culture, and at the center of it stood Zoe, once a quiet cleaner navigating the corridors with humility, now a respected leader whose insight commanded the attention of executives, employees, and even stakeholders beyond the hotel's walls. Her newly appointed role as Director of Talent Development felt surreal, yet it fit her more naturally with every passing day. She spent her mornings reviewing cases of overlooked workers who had quietly carried the hotel's success for years, her afternoons in strategic discussions with Lucas and other senior leaders, and her evenings reflecting on how different life had become. The pace was demanding, the pressure intense, yet Zoe thrived under it. Her journey had given her an unshakable understanding of the people the system had ignored, and she approached every decision with empathy, precision, and unwavering purpose. As her influence grew, so did the impact of her initiatives. Employees who had once walked through the hotel hallways with their heads lowered now moved with a revived confidence. Formerly unnoticed talents began stepping into roles where their skills finally mattered, and departments that had been stagnant for years were suddenly alive with innovation and enthusiasm. The mentorship program Zoe established quickly became one of the hotel's most treasured frameworks, pairing ambitious workers with experienced leaders who could nurture their growth. Every success story that emerged from the program strengthened Zoe's resolve, each one a quiet but powerful reminder of why she fought so intensely to expose the hotel's failings. Yet, as she poured herself into these initiatives, Zoe remained acutely aware that these changes were fragile. They required continuous guidance, reinforcement, and the unwavering support of those who believed in fairness and structural integrity. She understood that transforming a culture was not a single act of revelation, but a long-term commitment to rebuilding every flawed foundation with patience and precision. Despite the progress, not everyone accepted the shift easily. Some long-standing managers, bruised by the exposure of their past negligence, resisted the new systems, hiding their dissatisfaction behind polite compliance while quietly trying to protect their old ways of operating. Zoe faced pushback in subtle forms: delayed reports, incomplete cooperation, and thinly veiled attempts to undermine her authority. But she refused to be intimidated by remnants of the very culture she had worked so hard to dismantle. Instead, she approached each challenge with strategic composure, leaning on her analytical skills and Lucas's unwavering trust. She documented everything meticulously, countered resistance with data-driven reasoning, and made it clear that the new era of Grand Plaza would not accommodate anyone who clung to outdated beliefs rooted in favoritism and elitism. Her strength, calm and controlled rather than aggressive, became a quiet force that commanded respect even from those who doubted her. While Zoe handled internal hurdles, Lucas found himself increasingly impressed by her natural ability to unify people. Her background gave her a perspective no executive had ever possessed, allowing her to bridge the gap between the hotel's upper management and its frontline workers with extraordinary empathy. Lucas often watched her during meetings, noting how she balanced assertiveness with kindness, how her voice carried both authority and warmth, and how employees naturally gravitated toward her for guidance. He had always respected Zoe's intelligence, but now he saw her leadership potential blossoming into something far greater. She wasn't simply improving the hotel, she was reshaping its identity, transforming it into a place where people were recognized for their merit, not their connections, and where integrity mattered more than hierarchy. The admiration he felt for her grew quietly but steadily, even though he kept it respectfully at the edges of his professionalism. The outside world began to notice the internal revolution at the Grand Plaza as well. Articles in business journals highlighted the hotel's unprecedented talent restructuring, praising the model as a blueprint for organizations struggling with embedded bias. Invitations for conferences, interviews, and collaborative meetings poured in, and although Zoe was hesitant at first, Lucas encouraged her to embrace the spotlight. She attended her first major industry seminar with a mixture of nerves and pride, delivering a powerful speech about hidden talent, systemic neglect, and the responsibility leaders bore in recognizing potential where no one else looked. Her words resonated deeply with audiences, many of whom were moved by her authenticity and the depth of her personal experience. For the first time, Zoe stood not only as a symbol of change within one hotel, but as a voice for thousands of overlooked workers across industries, people whose brilliance had remained unseen simply because they were positioned in the shadows. Yet, despite the growing recognition and evolving responsibilities, Zoe never forgot where she came from. She still made time to walk through the service corridors, greeting the cleaning staff, kitchen workers, and maintenance crews who had once been her peers and who now admired her transformation with a sense of shared pride. They saw in her rise a validation of their own worth, proof that skill and dedication were not inherently tied to uniform color or job title. Zoe spoke to them candidly, encouraging them to apply for new roles, pursue training opportunities, or voice concerns without hesitation. The quiet gratitude in their eyes reminded her daily why her mission mattered. It wasn't about prestige or titles. It was about rewriting a structure that had failed people like them for far too long. Still, even as progress flourished, Zoe could feel that not all shadows had been erased. She sensed an undercurrent beneath the surface whispers of those aligned with Whitmore, individuals who resented their loss of power and were searching for new ways to regain it. Though they operated discreetly, Zoe recognized the signs: coordinated delays, suspicious gaps in communication, and occasional rumors that seemed strategically designed to sow doubt. She knew better than to dismiss these subtle threats. The exposure of corruption had not ended the old system completely. It had merely weakened it. And weakened structures often fought hardest before they finally crumbled. Zoe prepared herself quietly, knowing that the next stage of her journey would require not only resilience but strategic foresight. By the time the seventh month rolled around, the Grand Plaza Hotel had become unrecognizable not in its architecture, its luxury, or its pristine appearance, but in its heartbeat, its culture, and its soul. Zoe had established herself, not merely as a leader, but as the embodiment of the values she had long cherished: integrity, merit, and the unwavering belief that talent, when recognized, could reshape the world. The initial triumph of exposing systemic discrimination and mismanagement had evolved into a dynamic, ongoing revolution within the hotel. Departments previously stagnant with complacency now thrived on innovation, collaboration, and mutual respect. Employees across all levels walked with a newfound confidence, inspired not by fear of authority but by the recognition that their skills and ideas genuinely mattered. Zoe's presence in every decision, meeting, and mentorship session became a symbol of possibility for countless staff members who had quietly labored in invisibility for years. The final, defining test of her influence arrived in the form of the International Hospitality Summit, a gathering of the world's leading hotel executives, investors, and cultural consultants. Unlike previous events, this summit was not only about operational excellence, it was a demonstration of ethical leadership and progressive management. Zoe's role was pivotal. She coordinated a team of multilingual staff to serve as liaison officers for international delegates, ensuring that cultural nuances, legal protocols, and translation accuracy were flawless. She meticulously reviewed every presentation, contract, and briefing, anticipating potential misunderstandings before they could arise. The summit was a storm of pressure, high stakes, and public scrutiny. But Zoe thrived in the chaos, navigating it with the same precision and confidence that had characterized her meteoric rise. By the end of the second day, the Grand Plaza had become the benchmark for excellence not merely in hospitality but in operational justice and inclusivity, earning accolades from attendees who were impressed not only by the hotel's luxury but by the transformative leadership that made it function so flawlessly. Amidst the celebration of success, Zoe faced one of the most personal challenges of her career. Thomas Whitmore, recently dismissed and now seeking a last attempt to salvage his reputation, attempted to contact the board, claiming that Zoe's rapid changes were reckless and damaging to the hotel's profitability. He framed his arguments in technical jargon, weaving a story meant to undermine her credibility. But Zoe anticipated this. She had meticulously documented every step of her initiatives, the rationale behind each promotion, the metrics of improved performance, and the economic benefits of reducing outsourcing costs for translation and consulting services. When the board convened to review his claims, Zoe presented her comprehensive records, demonstrating the tangible financial and cultural improvements under her guidance. Whitmore's arguments crumbled under the weight of evidence, his reputation permanently tarnished, while Zoe's credibility and influence were solidified. That moment, though professional in execution, carried a deeply personal resonance. It was not vengeance that she felt, but a profound sense of justice and closure, a vindication that extended far beyond her own career. The success of the summit also brought international recognition. Universities, cultural organizations, and global hotel associations reached out to Zoe, inviting her to speak, consult, and share her model for identifying and nurturing hidden talent. Among these communications was a personal invitation from Professor Van Houten of the University of Amsterdam, whose call in Dutch had set Zoe's journey in motion. The letter praised her achievements and extended an offer for a visiting lectureship, allowing her to mentor students, deliver research-based workshops, and share insights on cross-cultural communication in international hospitality. For Zoe, the moment was deeply symbolic. The same skills she had once been forced to hide behind cleaning uniforms were now celebrated globally, and the mentor who had first recognized her potential was reaching across continents to reinforce the validation she had earned through years of perseverance. In the midst of her growing influence, Zoe never lost sight of the people whose everyday labor had formed the foundation of her journey. She implemented a permanent scholarship fund designed to provide educational opportunities for the children of employees and for staff pursuing advanced degrees in hospitality, linguistics, and international business. The first recipients were the children of housekeeping staff who had, like Zoe herself, dreamed of a career beyond the confines of service roles. By funding education, mentorship, and career pathways, Zoe ensured that the Grand Plaza Hotel would not simply celebrate change but sustain it, embedding fairness and opportunity into the company's culture permanently. Employees who had once felt invisible now walked with purpose, inspired by the knowledge that leadership recognized their worth, and that talent, no matter how quietly it had manifested, could flourish when given the chance. Yet, beyond the accolades, promotions, and international recognition, Zoe's most profound achievement was intangible. She had transformed a culture. Hierarchies no longer dictated worth, and privileges based on favoritism or appearance had no place in the new Grand Plaza. Managers who resisted were held accountable, and new leaders were chosen based on merit, vision, and empathy. The hotel was no longer simply a luxury destination. It had become a model for ethical leadership, operational excellence, and social responsibility. Zoe's influence radiated outward, inspiring neighboring hotels, industry peers, and countless individuals who had been quietly laboring under similar systems of neglect. Her story became a testament to the transformative power of perseverance, integrity, and unwavering belief in one's own potential, proving that even an institution steeped in tradition and prejudice, one person's courage and skill could spark change that resonated far beyond the walls of any building. As the sun set over the Manhattan skyline, Zoe stood in her office, overlooking the city that had once felt indifferent to her talents. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the long years of cleaning floors, the whispered dismissals of her qualifications, the frustration of ignored resumes, and the quiet strength it took to keep moving forward. In her hand was a small, framed photo of her mother, a woman who had sacrificed tirelessly so that Zoe could pursue her education. She whispered a quiet, grateful promise to honor that sacrifice not through personal accolades alone, but through the lasting impact of the system she had created and the opportunities she had opened for those who would follow. In that moment, Zoe realized that her journey had come full circle. The call in Dutch that had once seemed like a fleeting, almost inconsequential event had become the catalyst for a lifetime of influence, change, and justice. And as the city lights reflected across the glass of her office, she understood the greatest truth of all. True legacy is not measured by titles or wealth, but by the doors one opens, the barriers one dismantles, and the lives transformed along the way. Zoe Johnson, once invisible and dismissed, had become not just a leader, but a beacon of hope, a guardian of talent, and a living proof that potential cannot be hidden forever. The Grand Plaza Hotel, now thriving on fairness, innovation, and inclusivity, stood as her testament, and her mission, far from complete, would continue to inspire generations of overlooked dreamers to rise, to speak, and to create their own legacies of change.